on the battlefield, Ukrainians say that Russian forces near the key southern city of Kherson are now dug in 3 layers deep against an anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive. Kherson is the only regional capital that Moscow has managed to capture since its February invasion, and the fate of the city is extremely significant for both sides. It's hard sometimes to get a real sense of the state of play on the ground in this grinding war, so let's get insight from former U.S. Joint Chiefs Chairman, the retired Admiral Mike Mullen, and the former Deputy NATO Commander, General Richard Sheriff. Welcome back to our program, both of you. I just wondered if you could perhaps just weigh in on really the spirit that was, that we saw when we met those people in Irpin. I mean, that's the Bucha district. They couldn't have suffered worse pain. And yet you see these people who are nowhere near giving up. Admiral Mullen, what do you think?
Well, I agree, Christiane. I mean, the piece says an awful lot and is really uplifting in terms of the spirit, the determination, and the resilience. Even as Putin and the Russian military have taken this different tack to try to put them out of power at a really critical time, they seem to be bouncing back from that as they have throughout the war. So I would, I take great hope, or I have great hope for the future with respect to where this eventually goes because of that incredible resolve, the depth of the people of Ukraine, not just their military, but of the people and the political will that's behind it.
And General Sheriff, each of those civilians who I talk to say that their spirit and whatever they do in the rear, so to speak, is all designed to support the military who's fighting for them in the trenches and in the mud and in the cold right now. What do you think, knowing the European battleground and the battlefield, what do you think this national spirit means on the front lines?
Well, ultimately, and firstly, one has to marvel and be just full of respect and admiration for the spirit that your conversations have demonstrated. I mean, this demonstrates the iron will and determination of the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians. And as military history shows again and again, to quote Napoleon, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. The Ukrainians will do it. The Russians are on the back foot. But it absolutely behoves us all in the West to continue to give the Ukrainians the support they need, the support they deserve. If we can give them the tools to do the job, I am convinced that they will do the job. And that spirit will shine through.
I'm just going to point out that you're wearing the red poppy. It's the annual symbol of Armistice Day, the end of the war that the British and Commonwealth troops, they celebrate and they commemorate. So it's an important moment right now, all these years since the end of the 2 world wars in Europe. So let's talk about Kherson. And let me ask you both what you make of the slow but somewhat methodical activity in and around Kherson. Admiral Mullen, can I ask you what you think is going on there in terms of what we hear the Russians say? They're asking or telling citizens and civilians to move out. They say, or at least the Ukrainians are pointing out, that they're now dug in several layers deep. What do you think one can expect?
Well, Christiane, I mean, several months ago, all of us were talking about getting to some version of a stalemate. Certainly, that was as winter approached. I had several people tell me in September that winter had already arrived from the fighting standpoint, and that clearly has not been the case because the Ukrainians continue to make progress. But literally since Kyiv, the lines of communication, the logistics challenge, the battlefield challenge they've all been extended. And so the further east that the Ukrainians go, I think the tougher the fight. And certainly Kherson as a regional capital will be significant, not just physically significant, but I think really significant as to the eventual outcome. I think the more Ukraine reaches to the east, the tougher the fight's going to be, much less in the middle of the winter, which is obviously now setting in. So I think we can expect a very, very difficult battle to come in the next few weeks and months, with Kherson very much in the middle of it.
General Sheriff, what is the value, the strategic value of Kherson? Apart from the fact that the Russians took it practically on day one, it's the only major city that they've taken, and they're desperate to hold on to it. Its position is crucial, right, for both sides?
Exactly that. I mean, losing Kherson would be a humiliation for Putin. But the Kherson is the key to the Black Sea coastline. And if the Ukrainians regain Kherson, then the Russians are going to be pushed back to the west, to the eastern side of the Dnipro. And that gives Ukraine access again to the Black Sea. And of course, that means that they're not just dependent on Odessa to get their grain, their steel out to the rest of the world, but they can use other ports as well. So Kherson is of strategic importance.
I want to ask you both, because what we seem to have seen is a subtle and not so subtle shift in the balance of artillery power, maybe not physical numbers in terms of manpower, but certainly in the effectiveness of what the Ukrainians are using, thanks to all the NATO equipment that is coming in. Now, it was reported in one of the newspapers that a Ukrainian commander on the ground, basically said that if the Russians, as sort of ill-equipped as they are right now, hang on to Kherson, it could be their Stalingrad. And I just wondered, Admiral Mullen, what you make of how the Ukrainians are using all this new kit that is coming in, and what more you think they need.
Well, I think they've actually been extraordinary in terms of their ability to respond. I was very happy to see reported publicly in the last day or two that the air defense systems, I think one from the U.S. and one from Spain, have arrived, because that's not an insignificant threat as well, and supporting them in that regard, in addition to the systems that we've provided thus far, plus the intelligence sharing that we clearly have provided. And I think in a way, and it gets to this Black Sea issue, I think if Putin loses control of the Black Sea, you could almost say that he's lost the war. It is one of the reasons he took Crimea originally, so that he wasn't going to lose his fleet capability, his Navy fleet capability in Sevastopol. And I think we do, as it gets harder and harder financially for many countries to support, I think we also need to keep in mind how vital that sea lane is to support the food issues that are throughout the globe right now because of this war. There were many countries that were on edge before the war started in terms of food insecurity, and that has been badly exacerbated. So in a way, it really is, Kherson has the possibility of being a real standoff position that could turn the outcome of this war one way or the other. And then lastly, as it continues to turn against Putin, my biggest worry is that somehow, being desperate and losing, he'll turn to the use of nuclear weapons, which I think changes everything. And we need to figure out as best we can how that could never happen. And that's a very, very complex and difficult task as well.
I'm going to get to that in a moment, because obviously it is the big thing that worries and scares everybody. But let me just ask you, you're an admiral. You understand better than any of us the sea, the war on the sea and the laws of the sea. You saw that the Ukrainians used suicide drones against parts of that fleet that you're talking about near Sevastopol in Crimea. How important is that then, given what you just said about the vital nature of that whole coastline for Russia? What more damage do you think the Ukrainians could do there?
Well, as I understand it, I think the Russians have moved their fleet, basically out of range, certainly of the kind of missile where the Moskva was sunk. But if I look at Moskva and I look at the recent action with respect to the Ukrainians impacting on it, I'd say the Russian fleet is pretty vulnerable, and I don't know that they could hold up very well in a kind of conflict. And it's an asymmetric vulnerability. So I would expect the Ukrainians to continue, or certainly to support that. Obviously, the Russians will use that fleet as much as they can to control both access and trade in and out of the Black Sea, and certainly impacting that in ways where they can't do that would have a huge impact on the outcome of the war as well.